It's 10:50 at night on a Sunday night here, and ESXi 5.5 is out, and I want to go ahead and create a data center in my home lab. ESXi 5.5 hypervisor coupled with vCenter appliance. Let's get started. We've got a Windows 8 pristine system here, so no smoke and mirrors. If we look at my downloads folder, those three files are ready: the installer, the appliance, the VI client. Why? Because I already walk you through and handhold your way through each of the URLs on how to get those files. So we did get those downloaded before the video started. What's on the next tab? Rufus. This is what we're going to use to actually create bootable media. So the bootable media we're going to create is a USB key. Actually, we can go back to the browser and just take a look on Amazon here. This is the key I have. They're very cheap. All you need is at least 4 gig in size. So let's get started with sticking that key in. So if we run the Explorer and we go to this PC, stick in that flash drive, we see it appears, and it's blank, ready for me to go ahead and use Rufus on it. All right, so let's take a look at my article about Rufus, and it gives us a download link. Okay. Save as. I made an empty folder called util. I like to save all my utilities in that folder. That's just part of what I do with base machines. Okay, if we say open folder, we can then take this executable, which does not need to be installed anywhere, and just right-click and pin it to taskbar, making it easy to reach for the rest of this video. Closing out Rufus, we're done with that. What's another download we need before we get started? Putty is another one. Doesn't need to install, just save it. Putty's been around for a very long time at the same strange URL. Okay, we're going to save in that same folder. That's fine. No install needed for that guy. Right-click, pin to taskbar. Done with Putty. How about WinSCP? We don't need to install it. We can just use the portable version. And we'll save in that same util folder. Okay, we're done with the browser. And extracting WinSCP to a subfolder is a good idea. Now it's usable. And pin to taskbar. Okay, none of these things need installs, they just needed icons to make them easy to run. Let's run Rufus. So when we run Rufus, it's going to find the USB media. Do we need it to get application updates? No. It found the blank media, SanDisk, MBR partition scheme for BIOS or UEFI. It'll work on both. We're going to boot from USB 2 port on the front of my vZilla server. But we do need to point to the ISO file. What ISO file? This one. ESXi hypervisor. 300 meg in size roughly. Okay, it's an ISO image. It gives us a warning about an obsolete item. If we say no to this, it won't even boot. So we say yes. This just gets past the initial bootloader. The ESXi install you end up with in the end on the same flash drive will be the same as you would get without using Rufus, with other utilities that drop you to command line on Linux, for instance, that VMware offers up. But this is a whole lot simpler. So we've now pointed the ISO. All the other options are fine. My Rufus article on takeyourtry.com explains all this, screenshot for screenshot. Click OK, gives us one more warning, and there it goes. Okay, Rufus is finished in 1 minute and 39 seconds. Now, we can close Rufus and eject the USB key. And now I'm going to insert it into the server, which is currently powered on at the BIOS boot screen. So this motherboard is a Z68 motherboard from mid-2011, and I'm going to focus on the items that could be likely to apply to your current vintage or similar motherboard. So we tab our way to the clock, and first thing I want to do is just go ahead 4 hours in time. I'm East Coast time, so this will work well. So I jumped ahead 4 hours. A little clumsy, but I'm trying to avoid the mouse, which is even clumsier. Okay, so now we are 4 hours ahead of time. This will work out nicely when it comes to syncing our clock with NTP later on. Okay, next, what else is in the BIOS that we need to pay attention to? Let's go over to CPU configuration tab and point out Intel virtualization technology enabled, you'll need that, and no execute memory protection, you'll need that. ESXi will complain if you don't turn that on. What else? How about Northbridge? Here's the other setting, VTD, you'll want that on. Okay. Some of these other things, you can turn off FireWire and stuff like that. Storage configuration, you definitely can want AHCI turn on. USB, I'm booting off a USB 2.0 device. This is the factory defaults. It handles that nicely. We're avoiding the complexity of trying to boot off of USB 3. There's really no advantage for ESXi anyway. Once it boots, it's just sitting there much of the time. The boot order is important. Boot option 1 is the SanDisk that we just inserted. Boot option 2 is disabled. We don't want any other boot targets. And we don't want to boot from the LAN. Okay, so I'm going to save changes and exit. And here we are at the top of the hour, 11:01, just slightly after the top of the hour. And we're actually doing starting our install of ESXi itself now. The first time it boots off to the installable media, the flash drive we made with Rufus. It installs to itself that same flash drive. And the next boot now has your configured hard-coded IP ESXi host ready to rock and roll. This machine has a PCI card added, meaning you're looking at a RAID adapter, so it's normal for you to have to wait for that. Your boot will probably be quite a bit quicker. The Intel SATA ports are what are recognized by ESXi this time, not the AS media ports. You'll see the ESXi 5.5 installer beginning now. I don't need to hit any keys if I'm willing to wait 5 seconds, and there it goes. Just hit enter to continue. Hit F11 to accept the agreement. And now it's scanning for existing storage devices. I should point out I have the MFS formatted storage devices. So ESXi hosts, they don't format anything. They're looking for existing partitions to possibly install too. So it's unlikely you're going to accidentally install and nuke something you didn't mean to. It will tell us a list of things it finds and then give us time to pick from a fairly clear list of what it finds as an install target. In our case, it's going to say the word SanDisk. It's going to be pretty obvious. Leaving all our other file systems and hard drives as is. That's a good thing, as you're going to see later on, because if you have virtual machines living on those other data stores, you simply import from them. So I'm going to hit down arrow and go to the SanDisk Cruiser. That's the 4 gig device we created with Rufus. Hit enter. It gives us a little warning. I'm going to say OK and go to US keyboard and choose a password. Upper and lower numbers, letters. Okay, now we're able to hit F11, which is the last keystroke or piece of attention we need to provide to this window, and then we can kind of walk away and let it rip. Speeding up the video now. When we hit enter, it's going to be our first boot. Also, don't have to worry about ejecting DVD media anymore either, right? This is a much more elegant install approach. No reliance on TFTP, FTP, NFS mounts, any of that, or networking. Just simple, dirt simple. No networking needed. So that's part of why I like this approach. You don't have to go in the BIOS much. You don't have to think much. Most of the time, it's just cranking away. Now we're ready to customize it. Hit F2. And we're able to hardcode to configure our network adapter now. So DHCP fed me an IP, but I'm going to go ahead and hardcode one now, as you should really do with any server. Type in our name. I'm going to call mine ESXi. So I'm going to hit escape, and it's going to say, hey, you've made changes. Do you want to apply them? I'll say yes. Always a good idea to now test the management network. It's got some pre-configured stuff it's going to do, like pinging my gateway, pinging my DNS, which is Google, public DNS, and then trying to do a reverse lookup or resolve my host name. That's going to fail. I don't have true DNS, it's just a home router. But that's okay. We're going to cover that in this video and ways to deal with that. It'll work just fine even without it. All right, so that's done. So what happens if we point our browser straight to that IP? Well, it helps if you type in this. HTTP, okay, and it gives you some warnings, and there you go. When you click on download vSphere client, it's coming from the public website. You can see it in the bottom left corner. It's the same code we already downloaded before the video. So instead of downloading or waiting around for downloads, I went ahead and downloaded the client in advance. We're going to need that to connect and install the vSphere appliance. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the installer, close the browser, close the folder. Okay, hit next. Accept the license agreement. Next. Next. Install. Okay, so now we have the vSphere client installed. I'm going to hit Windows plus X to open up a command prompt as an administrator. Why? I want to edit the host file. Adding 2 simple lines to the end of it. I hit Tab. Those are my 2 hosts that I want to be able to see by name. So now when I type ping ESXi, it knows what to do with it. And now when I launch the vSphere client we just installed, it knows what to do with that as well. Okay, this is our very first login. Install a certificate, say ignore. Typical in a home lab to have to deal with some cert errors, not particularly important or worrisome. Okay, we're in. So things are going very well. We're kind of entering the next chapter now with deploying our appliance. So let's give ourselves a little more elbow room. To deploy the appliance, we click File, Deploy OVF Template, browse our way through the file system to the vSphere OVA file. Open. Click Next. That bundle has all the files in one. It's 1.7 gig roughly total, and it'll create these multiple drives. I'm not going to thick provision anything. I'm installing it in a solid state, so I'm going to want to thin provision both drives. So we might notice it says SLES. That's SUSE Linux, but don't worry about that. You don't need to touch Linux directly. You'll see this is rather straightforward to configure all through a web user interface and WinSCP. I'll show you. So let's click Next. Here's our appliance. I like to give it a little better name. I go with something like this. The host name, a dash, a description, and the build number, because these things change. All right, let's click Next. The Run Core solid state drive, that's SATA 3 attached, has 92 gig available. It says insufficient space. That's okay, because I'm going to be thin provisioning. The next screen, I say thin provision, and that problem's solved. We'll have plenty of room. Do not power on after deployment. Just click Finish here. Okay, because this is Windows 8, we have this nice little luxury of showing the transfer speed in real time. Okay, completed. Click Close. Notice at the bottom it says how long it took. Can resize those so we can get a better grip on what's going on. Notice ESXi is the name of the host, just like we like it. It should have its clock set, right? So let's do that. So on the ESXi host, before we start fiddling with the appliance, let's go to the Configuration tab, and let's go to Time Configuration, Properties, NTP Client Enabled. So the ESXi host is going to get its clock set from a server I'm going to specify here. I happen to have Cox, and this should work. Okay, we click OK. What have we missed here? We've got it running, right? But what about after our reboot? So let's be careful. Go back into Options and say Start and Stop with the host. Very important. Click OK. Click OK. How about SSH? Security profile on the ESXi host. In a home lab, you might find yourself wanting to have SSH enabled. You can do that by clicking Properties, SSH, Options, Start and Stop with Host. Click on Start. Notice it didn't stick there. Now click Start and Stop with Host and click OK. Okay, next. you're going to get a warning about SSH being enabled on your ESXi host. So you can turn that off by going to Advanced Settings, scroll down to User Vars, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and say Do Not Show Warnings for Shell Access. Change that to 1 and click OK. Done. Next, the virtual machine appliance here, the appliance that is a virtual machine. So we want to edit its settings. There's a reason we didn't turn it on. Change it to 4 gig of RAM. Okay, that's sufficient. Go to the console view and boot it up. Hit Windows plus right arrow to make it take up half the screen. We don't need to take up the whole screen. And we're going to let that boot. Now once that virtual machine is up, we're going to want to point a browser to it. So let's go ahead and get started with that. That was pretty quick, huh? It's already ready for us. So let's start our browser and type in what it says. Continue past the warning. Password is VMware. Hit enter or click OK or login. Accept the license agreement. Click next. You could scroll down and read that. All right, on the right you'll see some stuff happening. This next screen's a little funny. It tells you to cancel out of this wizard if you want to set a static IP. Well, that's me. I want to set a static IP. I don't want to rely on my home router feeding out the same DHCP reservation or any of that. I just want this thing to always have the same IP. So I am going to cancel out of this wizard. A little weird, right? All right. Next, we're going to go to the Time tab and synchronize using VMware Tools and hit Save. So now this appliance should keep its clock set to the same as the ESXi host it's running on. Next, also typical for home environment, the Admin tab. You may now want your password to expire. And you may want to change from the default to something a little tougher. Perhaps the one you use for your ESXi host. Again, this is not best practices for a data center. This is ease of use in a home lab where you might only occasionally use your infrastructure. So convenience is the goal here, but full function despite the convenience. Configure name and IP. This is the important tab, network tab. Click on address. Change DHCP to fixed IP. Change the name to something like vCenter is what I went with. What's a good idea before you actually light up an IP? Try to ping it. No one's home, so that's good. So now we can save those settings without fear. And naturally we broke our own connection. Makes sense, right? Now, let's type it in again. This time typing vCenter 5480. Makes you leave that original page, makes you go to this new one. You can type in the new password, and we're in. Now the Time tab, I've noticed, doesn't always stick, or the setting to sync with VMware Tools. So let's just click the Time tab, check in on it. Good, still there. So back to the Summary tab. Got that peace of mind I was looking for. Next step, we're going to WinSCP our way in, and we're going to tweak the host file so that reverse lookup doesn't break the wizard. The single sign-on will fail if you launch the wizard at this point. So you've been warned. So it's time to break out our WinSCP. You remember that icon we installed? That shortcut down here? That's WinSCP. Not hard to use. Username, password. Can leave everything else alone. In a whole lab, you have a decision. Do you want to save your password? And now we can log in. Say yes to that. Fingerprint cache prompt. That's quite normal. And you'll find this is sluggish to log into. It might even try to warn you about some timeouts. You can ignore those, it will get in. There you go. We don't need to see that banner every login. Okay, we're in. Go up a directory, go to the root, and go to etc. And that's where you're going to find your host file, right there. Always a good idea to back up your host file. So let's drag and drop and copy it. There. Now if we double click the host file, it should bring up the editor. It did. What's next? This is important to follow very carefully. You don't want the host name in this first line. You're not supposed to touch that first line, but in our case, we do want to touch it. So I'm going to remove that word. I'm going to move it down here, get rid of the trailing space, and type in. And hit tab. There you go. And the other host. Now this should look familiar. I usually do a carriage return at the end there. We just constructed a host file that looks very much like this one, other than the first line. I'm leaving that. Okay. In Windows, you have that marked out, but on this Linux box, moving the host down to here, this will fix single sign-on errors that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so I'm proofreading my work, and I'm just double checking that everything looks good. Okay, so we can close that and say yes to save changes. You'll see the host file changed at 11:36. That doesn't look right. So let's hit refresh. So it's saying connecting at the bottom. It is still trying to pump that file up. There we go. Wait for it, wait for it. Boom, 11:41. So we now have a new host file in place. What does that get us? Well, that's coming up. You'll see. This was worth it. Trust me. All right. Now we're ready to run the wizard and not get an error. That's why it was worth it. So we run the setup wizard, launch, and we say configure with default settings. It becomes super duper easy. We can just watch it at this point. And start the clock and just let it run. It takes a while. Very normal for it to take a while. So that's a good sign. It finished without errors, as I kind of promised you, right? All right. I like to make sure vCenter says running, and it does, right there. And we're going to go ahead and reboot it. Now, under the System tab, you have a handy-dandy reboot button. Why am I doing this? I don't technically have to, but I want to be darn sure this thing works cleanly even after a reboot, that there's no latent fault or something nastiness going on. So this is as good a time as any to go ahead and reboot and build my confidence in this appliance we just built. Plus, we tweaked its host file, so let's, just again know that this thing can add an ESXi host after a reboot just fine. I don't want any surprises. Now, there's something we can do that's important. During this reboot, we can set the ESXi host to auto start this vCenter appliance. So let's start by opening a console window so you don't miss anything here. Good. And now, as that's booting on the left, on the ESXi appliance, we can go to virtual machine startup, shutdown. These settings, by default, are not good at all, really. So I go to Properties. I say Allow virtual machines to start and stop automatically. For a home lab, something like 15 seconds with starting immediately with VMware tools is probably appropriate. And for shutdown, something more like 15 seconds. But I definitely don't want to power off by default. I want to guess shutdown. I want to try to gracefully shut down VMs, if at all possible. And then finally, let's move things up. I want to move this vCenter appliance we just built into the automatic startup group. Okay? So did all that make sense? If we set these two short, you end up with a whole bunch of disk thrashing. If all these are on one disk, it's going to have a hard time completing all these tasks in a timely fashion. So you want to spread it out a little bit. Click OK. And now if we reboot the ESXi host, we have confidence that vCenter is going to auto start. This is the infrastructure we're trying to build, something solid, something that handles routine operations and power outages and so forth nicely. So to reduce confusion, let's go back and bring up the console view here. Close that pop-out and just wait for this thing to boot. Okay, it says VPXD. So the server service, it's ready to receive a login, right? So we've got a web login here. We've got the vSphere client logged in. What if we right-click on this and open another copy of the vSphere client? And let's log in now to this new thing called vCenter, just to make sure everything's hunky-dory over there. Install a certificate, yes. Now on the right, it's still doing stuff, but that's for the web client. We'll test that next. All right, click OK. So there, it's looking good. Now I do not like to use this wizard because we got to get used to what ESXi 6 will probably be called, doing away with this vSphere client, heading towards the web client. So yeah, I'm done. That works. We can close it. In fact, at this point, it really is time to try out the web client for our first time. How do we do that? Well, how about we strip off the CRUD at the end of here and say continue to this site. And right here we have a login to vSphere web client. Bottom left shows you the URL it's going to go to. So we don't have to remember how to type anything. Continue. Yes. Notice we don't have to remember IP addresses either. Okay. We get an error because that thing on the right is still busy. Not exactly shocking. I'll also point out this would be a good time if you like Chrome or Firefox to go ahead and download those, because on Windows 8.1 you get Internet Explorer 11. So we may or may not have good luck with all the features that we're going to need to connect. Let's try if these help links work. Okay, that worked. That's cool. So it gives us something to read while we wait. Okay, I hit back arrow and it looks like it's ready for me to actually log in. Okay, it gives us a warning about our browser being unsupported. Remember what I was just saying? So there you go. We're on a later version, minimum of IE7, so it's probably going to work, but it doesn't know what to do with this version that came out after. This is Windows 8.1, the generally available code. That's going to be, well, generally available in October, but it's from MSTN or TechNet. That code that's released in September will become the code in October 17th, 2013. Okay, we are good to go. I'm going to maximize that window. We're going to close this warning about licensing, 60 days. And we're ready to follow along with the happy wizard. One more thing I want to check here. Do you remember I was warning you about this time piece, and if it held on. So after the reboot, we're now logging back in. Let's click on time, make sure it held on to time sync, and it didn't. So I find this is a bug. If it doesn't hold on in the first build, save it now, and after at this point, even after reboots, it should stay synced. Okay, not sure why that is. Let's live with that. Okay, back to the web client. We're done with that, and we're ready to the vSphere look and feel here. Okay, but on vSphere now, vCenter servers on the left. We click there, and we get a nice little wizard, create data center. That's what we need. Just click OK. It names a data center. I'm cool with that. Brings up the next wizard, add a host. ESXi. Why is this going to work? Because we tweaked its host file, so it should know how to find it by name. And it did. Say yes. Done print. Next. License key. If you have one, you can put that in, or you can just click next for the trial, where you have full functions. Next, next, and finish. Give us a summary of our data stores. So we've done it. We've created a lab in less than an hour. Now, my focus is really for new users that have no storage and don't know what they're doing with VMs, but it's also for people that just want to rebuild their lab and see how quick and easy it is to import an existing VM. So worry not, I'm going to cover both topics. So the ESXi host got added, and that's done. If we click on Home, we can get to a view that looks familiar. Let me show you what I mean. Go to the host view, just open this up. Does that not look awfully familiar? All right, going back to here. So you get the idea that you can make this thing look an awful lot like the old client. It's not that terrible to get used to, and it runs with decent speed with 4 gig of memory in a home lab, an appropriate number based on the documentation VMware puts out. It runs with a decent speed, especially off a solid-state drive. So we'll get used to this web client. Okay. Select data center level right there, and you'll see something called Add a Data Store. So if you have hard drives you slipped in for this home virtualization lab project and you haven't formatted yet, here's your chance. Create a VMFS data store. Sounds good to me. Select a host, ESXi, and here's a nice RAID enclosure I have that I have not yet formatted or done anything with. Okay, it's 5.4 gig. There's nothing on it. And it happens to be SATA 2 attached. Something like that. I'll go with the naming scheme I used in my other ones. Okay, VMFS 5 enables 2+ terabytes. So yeah, I want the latest. Click next. And do I want to fill up the whole drive? I can. And click finish. Okay, so that's off and busy formatting a VMFS file system. What can you do with a VMFS data store? Well, you can upload an ISO file to it and then very quickly install an operating system in your new data center. So that's basically where I'm going to close out this video. I'm going to find some existing VMs I already have, and then I'm also going to create some new one new VM as a sample. At that point, really, we've built our data center and covered all our bases for the basic skills involved in doing a home lab. Okay, so it's now midnight. We hit the hour point. I talked a lot and explained a lot. You could do this a lot quicker, especially after rehearsal, having done it once or twice. Assuming you have similar hardware. This is a 2-year-old Core i7 machine with 32 gig of RAM. Now this external RAID array I'm formatting right now is actually rather affordable and slow. It's SATA 2 attached. It's 4-bay external RAID enclosure, which was under $200 by Mediasonic. So it's going to take a little while for it to format. So I'd like to cover how you browse a data store. So if we go back to the ESXi host, click on there, you can see a summary of all kinds of information about this ESXi host. And it finds stuff about it. If there's issues, it should warn us. Performance we can look at. Hardware status. I'm going to want to make sure my RAID adapter is monitored, for instance, for health. All right. Some warnings about some data stores being kind of foolish. You can clear them, but you have to be very careful. Keep an eye on those. What if we want to manage storage in this ESXi host? Here's our storage adapters. So AHCI ports, you saw those in the BIOS at the beginning of the video, and then you see this mega RAID, that's the LSI RAID controller, right? Okay, that's our adapters. How about storage devices? There's our devices, like the one that we're bringing online, that's now online, the VMFS data store. We can see our data stores, including the one we just created. Let's get ourselves a better view with a little more elbow room. Okay, so that wasn't the best name right there. Let's rename it to be consistent. So it's supposed to be called S2E for external 5TB. It's destined for offsite backups at some point, so I'll call it offsite. We could also use the serial number on the unit to keep it clear which is which. Okay, so that's the data store I just created. If I right-click it, you can browse files on it. And even on a brand new data store like the one we just made, you're going to see some stuff there. This is the new VMFS. It won't let you accidentally delete that folder, which you're not supposed to delete anyway. Okay, fine. How about we look at our options here and create a folder? How's that sound? Let's call it ISO. Cool. Let's go into this little ISO folder. And let's notice that we can't upload until we install this client integration plugin. Okay, might as well save this to our download directory like everything else we had. And we're going to go ahead and run that. So this will give us the ability to move files in and out of vCenter. We've got to close our browser. Okay with that. And click Next. If you have Chrome going, it'll ask you to close Chrome. And you might have to use Task Manager to really kill all copies of Chrome.exe. Okay, accept the license agreement, click Next. Click Next. Click Next. So this is making your browsers on your machine able to have hooks like moving files in and out of your data center. The installation is complete. Continue this page. Client. Continue. Now at this point, you might want to bookmark that. Okay, back to the Storage tab. back to the offsite Mediasonic where I was trying to push files into the ISO folder that we created. See if we have any better luck. And that didn't go well, right? So, time for Chrome. Or Firefox. Even though Chrome wasn't present, let's give it a try. It might actually work. Remember, we need to type in HTTPS. Okay, and this is the part where we can bookmark things, if we like. Go Chrome. Storage. Right-click, browse files on that storage. Could also say manage. That would work too. That would actually make more sense. All right, now let's click the up arrow. The drum roll moment. And it says allow. Nice! We did it. Now on this PC, I have an ISO file folder, excuse me. And there's Windows 8. So let's crank away at pushing up Windows 8. All right. So we have a file making the move up to the host over Ethernet. It's going to take a little while because it's large. What's next? How about finding some existing data stores or existing VMs? Like, for instance, this run core. What happens if we point to that? Notice we're on the Manage tab, so now it automatically goes into the Browse view. You can see I already have some ISOs on the run core. So we don't really need to wait for this ISO we're pushing up. Right? We can go ahead and kick it off. Kick off a Windows 8 install from here. It's actually a solid-state drive, so it should be nice and snappy. Where you click on hosts and clusters, if you're used to the old vCenter client, you're going to feel most comfortable here, including right-clicking on the host that you want to create a new virtual machine on. So just right-click and say New Virtual Machine. Sounds good, right? Something like that. 64-bit, that's actually Pro. Just follow the wizard, put it on a data store where you have some space. Do we want it latest and greatest? Yes, we do. If we want the latest and greatest features in USB 3.0, mapping to the VM, or greater than 2 terabyte drives, booting from UEFI BIOS, that kind of stuff, you do want the latest and greatest. So Windows 8, there's no 8.1 drop-down menu, but it works. Let's call it Windows 8. And here's all your settings. What you want to do here is on the CD, change client device to host ISO file. And this will be your super duper fast way to install VMs. You want it to connect to power on, very important. 2 gig of RAM. This size you may really want to change. You told it you want a 750 gig drive, a C drive, giant drive. So be careful. Open up the hard drive section and say thin provision. Phew, that wouldn't have gone so well in a solid state drive, right? So you've got to be careful and pay attention to what you're doing when you thin provision. And watch carefully about solid-state drives filling. You need to connect to it, and this will be our last test. Does our console connect? And does our Chrome just work? So we go to the Summary tab. You'll see that it's powered off, so Launch Console is grayed out. That's different than the old vSphere client, so just get used to it. Powered on, and now Launch Console should be an option. You get a warning about VMware tools not installed, that's fine. Pop-up blocking we're going to have to turn off. Always allow pop-ups from vCenter, sounds good. And let's try that again. Woohoo! Nice, huh? And from here, you probably know the rest. Last piece of magic that you may not have thought of using. Now that you have a vCenter appliance, if this is your first time using one, you've got some magic going, like migrate it to a different data store while it's running. This is a little different than vMotion. You can move this VM that we're installing here to another ESXi host if I had one. I don't right now. But you can also just point to running VM or a turned off VM and just move it from this primo tier of solid state goodness over to a slower tier like this. And say, move. There it is. Right there. It's relocating that virtual machine to that very busy data store that's also receiving that ginormous ISO file. So what about existing VMs that are on those data stores, right? So back in the storage area, you'll see on the run core, I've got a Windows 8, one VM already built. And if we look a little deeper in there, you'll see the exact file names. And the last time I used that, it was booted on just 5 days ago. So if we right-click on the VMX file and say register VM, that's a little different. It used to say add to inventory, now it says register VM. And just click next. It already has the name and inherited it's where it came from. It just needs us to pick the word data center before it lets us hit next without an error. And then pick the ESXi host. Click next. And that's it. So how cool is that? It's done. What does it mean? Well, let's go back home. Our little list of VMs now. What do you know? We have a VM that's pre-built and ready to power on. And to launch a console view too. So now I got that one going, booting. Then we got another one installing. That one happened to have been shut down, but even if it was suspended, I'd pick up right where it was. And there we go. It's pretty cool, huh? All right. Now you can have fun with your cursor. All right, make that minimize. Still got the charms tutorial going that's driving us a little nuts there. But yeah, we've got this VM going. It's got VMware tools. Mouse goes in and out. We can change resolution. This VM was good to go, and it's still good to go in this new environment with minimal fuss. I am just back in action. So hopefully you're convinced that it really doesn't take that long to rebuild a lab and bring back your existing library of VMs. And if this VM was important to you, you'd want to put that in your startup folder as well for ESXi host. VM startup and shutdown. It's all available in the web GUI. So if you like these Windows 8 VMs or they're important to you, you'd move them up in the order and make sure they boot the time of your ESXi host going up and down. If you have a large number of VMs to add from inventory, it can get a little cumbersome. Let me show you what I mean. So you've got a bunch of folders here on this data store, but it really doesn't tell you about when you last used those folders or when those folders were created to give you some idea of the vintage of what's in there. So that's where WinSCP comes in handy. Remember this shortcut that we made at the beginning of the video? Let's use it again. So we're logging into vCenter. WinSCP will also log into an ESXi host, by the way. And so will PuTTY. So if you're more a VI person or you like editing at a command line, you may remember you've got PuTTY installed as well. Where you can log in with a command line as well. But WinSCP, very handy if you don't really want to deal with the command line. So WinSCP logging to vCenter is not going to show you data stores. So let's use it again. Let's do WinSCP, launch from here, and let's do a new host. How's that sound? Now we're talking VMFS file system, volumes, and there you go. You got friendly names right there, like this giant LSI RAID with a whole lot of stuff. And now we can sort by day and time. So you can see the VMs that I've used recently all are clustered up here. It is a whole lot easier to find things that way. Unfortunately, though, you can't like right-click and add the VMX from there. But at least it gives you, a visual clue of where to head. So once you find something you want, like this one, PPBE, I can go over here and spot it in the alphabetical order. So it's not so bad, right? You get the idea. You could re-add a whole lot of VMs back in inventory pretty quickly. Maybe you have 20 or 30 you care about after rebuilding your data center. Just re-register them. You're right back in action. This one's very important to me because it automatically monitors the power in my house. If the power goes out, UPS knows it. It signals over the USB cable, problem, and shuts down ESXi host. Remember we told ESXi host to shut stuff off gracefully, and then power things back on when power comes back up. We have a bunch of VMs that'll auto-launch. So this VM is special that I told you about. It's the one that has a USB cable. If you look at it, there you go. It's got a USB controller and a CyberPower UPS attached. Please visit the accompanying article at tinkertry.com by using the handy link in the YouTube video description. Not only will you find step-by-step walkthrough instructions, but below the article, you'll also find the invaluable comments and constructive feedback from others. It's visitors like you that really make all the difference at this channel and at tinkertry.com, where your comments help others know if the article actually helped you out.